Yeah, just let me know if I'm echoing. I'm not using my headphones. I know that usually causes feedback, but if you don't hear it, then
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, testing. I don't hear anything.
sweet. All right, cool.
All right. How's it going?
That's good, man. Just got done. I've been working a crazy schedule, so it's been weird for me. So sorry it took as long as it did to get together on this.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, you said you got a new job or something?
Yeah, I'm working a lot later, so it's worth it, but it's just yeah, it's tough to get used to.
Are you going to make it to the thing in October?
I don't think so. I might be able to swing it now that I'm making some money that I'll be able to potentially do that, but I don't know. I guess it's just gonna depend on if I can get time off.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but
What are you doing? It's pimping? Male
yeah,
model?
yeah. Yeah, I took you joked about the OnlyFans stuff back in the day, and so I kind of just started posting pictures of my big toe, and it started just spiraling from there.
Ah, the
So
foot fetish methodology works
yeah,
really well. Yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah, and I have the anonymity, so I'm good to be anonymous, so it's nice.
Yeah, you got to hook up with the cougars. That's where the big money is. Not that I know. Like I heard it from a friend.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so yeah, I wanted to talk about because I had you on axioms and I've more so prodded you on your theory, and at the time I was a moral realist. I'm now no longer a moral realist. I'm not even really sure what camp I would necessarily belong to, so I kind of lean towards error theorist, but I wouldn't say I would commit. I'm still kind of navigating um in that front, but I feel like there's issues I have. Maybe you can just clear up, and they're not issues.
Sure.
Um, some of them might hit points you've already heard before. So if that's the case, I'm sorry you've had to parrot yourself 1,000 fucking times at this point. Um, but yeah, so I guess I would just start with the assessment of how you get to the assessment of imposition of will in the first place. I've heard you say that you look at moral progression versus intuition, and then you kind of look at the pattern. Is that like a fair assessment?
Yeah, so morality, what the word refers to is our feelings. Like we see a baby getting killed or something, we feel like, oh, that's really bad. And so we label those feelings as morality. And the question is do those feelings correspond to something in the world, or is it purely um, evolution, subjective? And so the question is, what does those feelings correspond to? What causes them? Is it just psychological? Is there something more there? And that's where we get the distinction between moral realism, moral subjectivism, that kind of stuff.
Okay. So I guess my hang up is like in virtue of what are you assessing that the progression is? So like how would you know at what you're looking at is an actual progression versus maybe the antithesis of a progression?
The fact that it goes in the same direction for all of them. Now, it's possible that what we're experiencing is a regression. That's possible too. Like it's possible that black is white and white is black, and you can't really tell the difference. But since all of the different societies are going in the same direction, and our feelings seem to correspond to that direction, then it seems like what we're going in would be called a progression. Like if it was all just going in a random direction, no matter what happened, then there wouldn't be a pattern at all. So there's definitely a pattern. We can see that as we gain in technology and resources, that our moral inclinations tend to go in the same direction in all cultures, more or less. The question is, like what you're asking, is that a moral progress or moral regress? Which obviously we can't prove until we've actually discovered an objective morality, but we can know it's going in the same pattern, regardless of whether you call it a progression or a regression. And so the
Okay.
point is that there is a pattern there, and which one you call it really doesn't matter because the pattern is definitely there either way.
Okay. So maybe you addressed it in this, but it seems like you would so I guess from my standpoint when I look at it when you say progression and you look at a trend, I'm wondering how it seems like you're concluding with imposition of will, but I feel like the progression part actually relates to it kind of subsumed in the premises more so.
What?
That because like that's what it would have to. So like essentially, when you talk about progression, that would have to refer to the imposition of will, right? For you to assess that it's an actual progression, or you're just saying there is a positive trend, or there's some trend.
Yeah.
And
So it
I'm
doesn't matter if
labeling.
it's positive or negative at all. There is a trend. We notice
Okay.
that as technology grows and intelligence grows, there is a very specific pattern. All moral tendencies are going in a direction. Maybe it's up, maybe it's down, but it's going in a very consistent direction. So like if you plotted it on a graph, depending on what you would put on the X or Y axis, you just call it question mark or whatever. It's either going up the graph or down the graph in a very, very direct line. And so we can call that something. There is something there to which we refer to morality, and what we determine to call that is based on our intuitions, essentially. So we see the fact that people are killing each other less often as moral progress, so we label that end of the graph progress. Now, we don't actually know if that's the case. Maybe there's some objective
Sure.
difference there, but we know there is a pattern, and it seems like the top of the graph is what corresponds to our feelings of goodness. And so what matters isn't what we label it. What matters is there is an objective pattern there.
Sure. Okay. So if I kind of just bite the bullet and say there's some pattern, and since you're kind of granting that it could be progression or maybe not the case, I'm wondering how it is that you kind of strip away normativity, because it seems like you take imposition of will as the pattern at which you find, but you say there's no oughts. However, like wills are going to be desire dependent in the first place, right? That's going to be kind of subject to whatever the agent's desires are in the first place.
Well, the fact
And
that
then
desires doesn't matter. It's just something is moral not because you ought to do it. You ought to do it because it's moral. So if you just take the basic Euthyphro dilemma, is normativity inside of morality? Is it a part of the ontology of morality? No. It's something we add on after the fact, after we know the ontology of morality. Then we can say we ought to do X. But the oughts aren't in morality itself anywhere. You don't need them. Just apply the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something moral because we ought to do it? Or ought we do it because it's moral? I just say the second one every time. We ought to do something because it's moral. Therefore, the oughts aren't in morality anywhere. They're completely outside of morality. There is something that we apply after we know what is moral, and so the oughts themselves are completely independent of morality in my model.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to digest that part, because like I hold to a position that normativity is it's just a non-negotiable feature of morality.
So you would say that something is moral because we ought to do it?
Something is moral.
So just to go through the dilemma again. So is something moral, if there is a morality? Is it moral because we ought to do it? Or ought we do it because it's moral?
Maybe you can tell me, because what basically my position, at least using your frame, and I'm not trying to do this to be evasive, but I would say like punching you being an involuntary imposition of will is going to be wrong in virtue of a further fact that punching you satisfies some standard of wrongness, right? Some standard of normativity.
Right, but when you said that normativity is necessarily tied into morality. So in your view, that means you have a view of morality. You think this is some required criterion. And so if that's a required criterion, then how would you answer the question? Like, so not in my worldview, in your worldview, when you think normativity is required, the question is why do you think that? Is it because something is moral because you ought to do it? Because if that's not the case, well, then obviously normativity isn't required. So it would only be required if you're saying that something is moral because you ought to do it, not the other way around. If you're saying you ought to do something because it's moral, well, then obviously you just don't need normativity. It's just not required.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at this propositionally in the fact that like whatever value or thing that you have is not going to be like you're going to have some normative premise in order to get to the conclusion, right? That I'm looking at normativity from the fact that like in order to establish this just deductively, right? Like this is just kind of the point of deductive logic, is that like what you put in is what you get out. You can't sneak in some value of some norm.
So that didn't make any
So
sense. That didn't answer the question. So if you're saying like normativity as in humans have desires, like sure, humans have desires. We don't need any kind of objective normativity for that. So if you would just normativity as in human desires for shoulds, yeah, we have
well,
those.
no, I'm saying like what it's the motivational force of what when we talk about what someone should do, right? Like, or whether it's categorical or hypothetical imperative.
Again, that doesn't answer the question. So take everything you're saying and answer my question of is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral? My answer is simple. You ought to do something because it's moral. Therefore, the oughts don't matter to morality at all. It's completely irrelevant. You can just get rid of
Yeah,
them.
I guess I'm saying that something is there's a moral fact, and that would give you the reason of why you ought to do something, right? Because it's a
Okay, yep,
prescriptive.
that's your assumption. So based on your assumption, you're saying that something is moral because you ought to do it, which is completely incoherent. So I just would say that's silly.
I'm just saying that there's a like so. I don't really think moral facts exist, but what I'm saying is, for the sake, if you're
Well,
going to
no,
talk about,
you said that normativity is required. If normativity is
if
required,
for a meta-ethical thesis, like
right,
you're
and so
a
that's
moral,
your assumption. In your assumption, that means you have to say something is moral because you ought to do it, which is just gibberish to me. Like that's clearly wrong.
so maybe you, and I'm not trying to be frustrating, but maybe you elucidate, because for me, when if you take away normativity in that sense, like there's nothing that stops me from just saying maximizing the amount of shoes in the world is moral, because we now we're not even talking about the same thing anymore.
Again, if morality is something in the world, then you don't get an opinion on it, so it's irrelevant. So not
Sure, I
important.
guess, but I guess at that point, all you have on the table is this is a new hypothesis I have of morality that doesn't necessitate normative facts in the way that we talk about it in metaethical thesis usually, but that's okay. And I could say, sweet, well, I have a hypothesis on the table that maximizing the amount of shoes in the world is moral, and I don't know how. I have no
Mine
idea how I
corresponds to our
differentiate.
intuitions. Yours don't. So I can just say yours is objectively false. Yours just doesn't correspond to the evidence. So I can say potatoes are gravity, but that doesn't correspond to the evidence. So potatoes are not gravity.
Sure, but I mean, I guess to use the gravity thing, if you're saying, because I take it you're a moral naturalist, right? So you would take it that it's some natural law or some natural fact, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's nothing that, and maybe you could just say I'm missing the point, but there's nothing about the fact of like gravity that's gonna prescribe that I ought not,
That's right, because you don't need oughts. Prescriptions are useless. They're garbage. You don't need them. They're not even in most models of morality. They're something you add in afterwards. So they're not inherent to like pretty much any model of morality. You don't need them. Like why would you need them? Like
to motivate a standard of how you would behave, and
I don't care. Like that's irrelevant to objective morality. Motivating people is not relevant to morality. There's
it seems like
there's actually there's
morality
two
is
positions.
irrelevant to morality.
So this is actually a really common position in moral philosophy. It's called judgment internalism versus judgment externalism, which is the view that morality must inspire or cause people to want to do something, which is just irrelevant. Like, no, you don't. It doesn't matter. Like, if the world can be round and not inspire people to want to believe the world is round, like it doesn't make a difference. The objective facts are not contingent on whether it inspires anybody. Nobody cares.
I guess, but it's like saying to me like the square root of David Schwimmer is a position in the philosophy of mind, right? Like we're not even like that's not what the domain of what we're talking about is at that point.
Well,
I mean,
actually,
that's fine.
It is. So
I don't know how to
said,
differentiate the hypothesis that strips away normativity from it, from the same aspect of saying, well, you know, I have a position in the philosophy of mind that equals to the square root of David
right. So
Schwimmer.
I already proved that is a completely wrong analogy. So if you want a hypothesis, it has to explain the data. Mine explains the data. Yours doesn't. Mine wins. So mine definitively wins in all of those cases because mine at least explains the data.
Okay, so what stops me from just saying well-being or some other thing that doesn't actually fit the criterion of impositions of will fits the pattern?
Sure, you can definitely come up with other hypotheses. That's perfectly fine.
So exactly, now we're back at the point that I'm trying to make, which is that we just have a hypothesis on the table at which I don't know how to distinguish that between, like, yeah, sure, I guess I'll grant maximizing the amount of shoes. You might win in terms of the virtues of the theory in comparison to the world, but I'm still left with, it doesn't matter about what descriptive assessments that we're left with to really look at. It seems that we have the same propositional issue of you just ascribing some value there and just saying that because like I can flip it if you say there's no odds, and I can say, well, the conclusion of your assessment is that I have this descriptive assessment of moral progression and intuition, and then I conclude with impositions of will, which I would say is normative because their wills are going to be desire dependent.
You're confusing.
And then I'm going to say, so we ought to not.
Wait. You're confusing normativity as in human normativity, we desire X, and objective normativity. There's obviously human normativity, you will stuff. That doesn't mean there's an objective normativity in morality itself.
Okay.
So like nothing you're saying here is a relevant critique of my morality. Like you haven't said, oh, this morality fails because X, other than the fact you think normativity is required. Like I don't care. Like it's not. Unless you can actually address my dilemma that I showed, is something moral because you ought to do it. You have to bite the bullet and say yes, which is gibberish, or explain how exactly that makes sense. Otherwise, you can't argue that normativity is required.
Well, yes. So my point was that the natural fact, or whatever your natural law is, right, of impositions of will, that can't alone just motivate you to do something. If I say
motivation is irrelevant, you haven't even argued that motivation is relevant to morality. Judgment internalism, I take that position. You don't need it.
But that's exactly what we talk about when we're talking about
the
situation at which you did something that is moral versus
so
the
again,
situation.
You're begging the question. You can't beg the question for your position. Judgment internalism is the position that no, morality does not need to in any way motivate anybody. So it's just false. That's not what we're talking about. Maybe what you want to talk about because of your preconceptions of morality, but I don't care. Like you would have to demonstrate that that's actually
saying
required.
The same, I guess, is what right? Like, I don't know. It stops me from just kind of flipping that argument back on you and saying, well, your intuitions stripping away normativity has not right. We're not going to make any progress with just saying that's not the case.
Well, that's fine. But I can. Wait. So I have good reasons. I have good reasons to reject normativity as it's completely incoherent and irrelevant and doesn't change anything about morality. So I can show normativity is.
Well, so okay, maybe help me out there because that's I'm not understanding how you strip that away. Yeah.
Sure. Is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral? Second one. Mine is easy. Yeah, if something is moral, that's why we ought to do it. It isn't made moral because we ought to do it. Therefore, the oughts don't have anything to do with morality.
Well, so again, I don't think there's moral facts in the world, but if we're going to talk about someone arguing for this thesis, you're going to have to say that there's a moral fact and you ought to do it because that's what it's doing. It's prescribing.
No, I don't. Again,
the reason why I agree.
I proved that false. You have
to
stop. You have to address what I said, or you're begging the question. So I proved that false. You would have to address what I said to show it's not false. Is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral? If you don't bite the bullet and say one and try to defend that position, then you've granted you don't need oughts. It's that simple. This is a proof you do not need oughts.
So I think you're confused on the position though, because what I'm arguing for is if you're gonna make
I've heard your argument like 4 times. You've said the same thing. Like you need to support that claim.
But you're wanting me to defend something that I don't believe in. But
you're making this claim. You are making the claim that you need normativity, so you need to defend that claim. I can prove you don't.
Yes.
I can prove you don't. Need normativity.
I did. I said if X is being an involuntary imposition of will or whatever it is that you've concluded is wrong. There's nothing about the fact that it's just a natural fact that tells you what you ought to do, right? So what I'm saying is that the fact that you have to have something that satisfies that standard, that's what when you take that away, then I don't know what stops anybody from any hypothesis.
It's the same thing. We're going to go back to the same point.
You just maximize the amount of shoes in the world is moral.
Stop or I'm going to mute you. So again, we're going back to the same point. You want to claim normativity is required in morality. I don't care. That's fine. If you want to make that claim, you have to defend that claim. I say it's not. It's very easily to show it's not. Is something moral because you ought to do it? No, that's stupid. Therefore, no, you don't need oughts.
So it's as simple as that. You could give me a syllogism at which you could conclude. I'm trying to figure out because you're going to say no, I don't need a conclusion that gets me to normativity. I can just have an argument for.
If morality is a fact, if it's a fact from a propositional
logic standpoint, how do you give like an argument for it? Because you're stripping away the fact.
Done. Like, you don't need normativity. It's just, you can say morality is X. If you do X, you're moral. If you don't do
Exactly.
X, you're
Then we're
immoral.
going back to my point about that. That I don't know how I don't just assess some other arbitrary
Because
thing that
there's a
fits.
fact of the matter in reality. One of us is right and one
Yes,
of us
but
is
we have a
wrong.
problem of underdetermination, Tom, where
So
we can
what? That
just
doesn't make a
literally
difference.
cite some other
Every
hypothesis.
every scientific fact is underdetermined. That isn't a critique. That doesn't matter. I make testable predictions. You make testable predictions. We find out who's right based on what the future expects.
Agreed, but at that point, I don't know what is even a testable prediction under this model.
Of what we would expect to see, like if we go to alien societies, what are they going to base it off of? How based off we go to more advancement, because the pattern is once we gain more technology or more intelligence, it will go more along this pattern as opposed to another pattern. And guess what? If we find that in other species, and if artificial intelligences develop that on their own, it follows the pattern.
I don't know how the intuitions of appealing to the populum of a alien society lends credit to the validity of the conclusion you draw.
Because that's the prediction.
Yeah, but I mean, Christians could just say, I predict that, in 33 AD, that Christianity will have billions of people that believe it. And that's not a novel prediction at all.
Well, it is actually. That's a novel prediction. It's not a very good one, but it is novel. But if they
Exactly.
predicted,
Well, okay,
if they, wait,
sweet.
stop,
Then
stop,
point
stop. So if
granted.
they predicted that aliens in other planets would also be worshiping Jesus, that would be a good prediction. That's definitely not something we would expect under their hypothesis. Like if we discovered aliens that all worshipped Jesus in every planet, that's pretty good evidence that Jesus is more than just a man.
Sure, but I think there's an issue with deriving Jesus as opposed to deriving someone saying like having freedom of your will is a good thing, right? I think
Not
those
really.
are really.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Like if we see something, like say mirage on the distance, and we say, that's an actual ocean and not just a mirage. Well, then we should be able to go to the people 500 miles to the left and say, well, do you see this too? Like, yes, we see this too. And 500 miles to the east, say, yes, we see this too. So, like, if everybody sees it, then that's more likely that it's not just a mirage.
So I'm trying to understand how it's a novel prediction different than some like inductive
Anything is a
assessment
novel
that
prediction.
sun
Like
will
if
come
you
up
predict that a
tomorrow.
gold brick is going to fall on your head tomorrow, that's a novel prediction. Like novel prediction just means predict something we don't know yet or don't expect.
Okay. So the only other one I've heard you mention is like if we mention that rocks fall on I don't want to straw man you, but it's something about like if we deem rocks falling as immoral or something, then that will be a novel prediction as well. Was that
Sure? So like in the future, we will see rocks falling on people as immoral. That's something that we will progress morally to see.
Yeah. So I don't know how appealing to the intuitions, right? Like I don't know. It seems like I'm going back to what I said at the beginning. Is like when you talk about progression or intuition, like you're necessarily kind of smuggling in the impositions of will there first in order to assess what that even is.
No, it's an indirect observation. So like if we say, I think neutrinos exist, but we can't actually see neutrinos, we have to see the way that we measure them is through like a device or whatever. And so we won't see the neutrinos, we'll see this kind of a measurement on the device. And right now the only device we have for morality is intuition. So the only thing that could give us an accurate understanding of what morality is you make a hypothesis about what our intuitions are referring to, and if that hypothesis is true, you predict how that's going to affect our intuitions in future. And then if that is an accurate prediction, and you can accurately predict how our intuitions are going to change if this thing exists and is affecting it in a certain way, that's good evidence that your model is correct. Like Einstein predicting gravitational waves. Like, did he actually observe space-time bending? No, he observed what he would predict as the consequences of that. Is that underdetermined? Yes. Does it matter? No.
Sure, but I mean, your hypothesis seems on a different level of underdetermined. Like it seems like I can rival that well-being or some other thing that fits the pattern, and we can have arguments within that. I don't
Like
understand.
how is that? What do you mean paralleled by underdetermined? Like every theory is underdetermined. Mine makes a novel prediction that like no other theory has ever made, just like Einstein did, that we will see rocks as falling on
But
people
it's
as
not going to
immoral.
confirm prediction. I can make the claim that
Anybody can do that with
my
wait, wait, stop, stop,
assessment of
stop. You're not
well-being
you
will
don't
make
understand underdetermination. Like anybody could have post hoc made the same predictions Einstein did. Like it's not hard to do that. You can say, "Oh, you made a prediction. I can just copy that prediction." Anybody can do that. This is not hard
yeah.
to do. So that's not a criticism of the position. The fact that you can post hoc steal my prediction is irrelevant.
No, it's not about post hoc stealing. It's about someone deriving a different hypothesis from the same set of data and then
Exactly
saying,
the
well,
same as every single scientific theory. That's not a criticism. That's just base underdetermination, the same as every
yes,
scientific
I get
theory.
that, but what you're saying is there's novel predictions in the future. Cool, yes, I grant that's cool, but I don't know how you're saying mine wins in virtue of not having the novel predictions right now.
Well, it doesn't.
Because I
It's a
could just make the
hypothesis. It's just
claim
a
that
hypothesis.
mine
I
will
never
have novel predictions.
I never claimed this was proven. I never claimed there was actual empirical evidence of it. It's just a hypothesis. That's the only claim I've ever made.
Sure. So then what stops me from a hypothesis with the same set of data at which
Nothing.
I
You
just
can make up a hypothesis too. That's fine. I don't care.
yes, but at which I just claim, well, this will have novel predictions in the future.
That's fine.
And
Do it.
yeah, but my criterion just saying people will think this.
That's
I don't
fine.
know how that establishes a moral fact in the world.
Like it would be if you had a hypothesis where that was a consequence of the hypothesis, like people will see drowning babies as moral in X number of years or whatever, and that actually happened, that would be more evidence for your hypothesis than mine because mine makes a different prediction. Sure. Is it proof? No, but is it more evidence? Yes.
Sure, I guess I'm that I'll have to. I mean, I appreciate the humility in just saying, yeah, this is a hypothesis in that sense, but I'm just wondering I don't know what stops me from just saying like I have some novel prediction with some other rivaling hypothesis given the data, right?
Nothing. That's perfectly fine. Scientists do that all the time. That's totally okay.
Okay, so the only novel predictions at which we could derive to confirm this are the intuitions of other agents.
No, it would be like, do we see the same patterns in all societies everywhere in space relative to intelligence and resources? Do our moral intuitions shift towards rock in the future? Like, obviously, it's going to be related to intuitions of something or patterns of cultures in
Sure.
something because that's the only evidence we have of morality yet. Once we had another way, that'd be great. But this is the best we have, so we can only make predictions based off of the best we have, which is intuition.
Yeah, and I mean, what rivals the intuition of most people, right? As like if I make a metaethical thesis and I say my novel prediction will show that normativity is something that most people agree with in these types of theories. And oh, lo and behold, that's what most people talk about when they talk about morality. And then I just use that as the novel
Well,
prediction.
that novel means something we don't know or expect yet. So saying here's something we already know and expect isn't a novel prediction. Like if you said my hypothesis is that normativity is required for morality, and if normativity is required for morality, then in the future here's something we don't expect based off this hypothesis, and you get it right, then yes, that would be evidence of normativity being required.
Sure. So someone making that claim in the past, I mean,
But
but you've stripped away normativity and said
no one's
it's
made
not
that prediction.
required.
That's
But
not
they
like
could
that's not
use the
something that's been
same.
confirmed. It's not like a novel prediction that has been confirmed in the past.
Yeah, but if they're using the same criterion at which you would just say in the future we go see this alien society and they believe this thing, it's like I don't see what's very much different from the person just saying, well, I had this hypothesis that people would find normativity to be a non-negotiable feature
That's
of
fine. You could do that. That
morality,
would
and
be
then now here
that's
we
fine.
are.
That's fine. So you could
Okay,
do that, and then that would be two contradicting hypotheses, and whichever one we discover would be more evidence for whichever one was right. That's perfectly fine.
okay, well, so then in the case like okay, so if I took your conclusion, I guess, which is impositions of will, um, what would be the issue you would have with me just saying like in whatever situation I ought not do something because it's an involuntary imposition of will? Right? Like
You can.
why can't I use that as a motivational standard?
You can. Like the motivations, you can have them, but they aren't a part of the morality itself. So you don't need them for something to be moral, but you can still use them. That's what I said. Something is not moral because you ought to do it, but you ought to do it because it's moral. So you can still add in oughts to my morality. It's not like you don't. You can like. It's not like it stops you from using oughts ever. You can still say once we know what morality is, we ought to do it. But the oughts aren't in the morality. The oughts aren't inherently anywhere in morality itself.
Okay, but you said once we know what it is, and when I had asked you earlier, you said like X is immoral or like impositions of will. If that's just a premise, I mean, I don't know how that's not just begging the question. I don't know how you justify that.
So there's a difference between saying normativity is a part of the morality. Like normativity is a particle inside the morality, and if this particle doesn't exist, then morality doesn't exist. There's a difference between that and saying that there is normativity in your psychology where you like things more, and so you choose based off of knowing this fact to ascribe normativity to it. There's a difference between you ascribing normativity and the normativity being in the theory itself. So mine is like, I'm saying it's perfectly fine that you can ascribe normativity. You can subjectively think, if this is moral, I should do it. Perfectly fine. That isn't anywhere in the model itself. Like there's no ontology of that in the morality. And so there's no problem of the is-ought in the morality. Even though you could apply it to your subjective preferences, there would be the is-ought problem. But since I don't need that because it's not in the morality itself. So you can still have oughts. It's just your subjective preference.
So then I'm trying to, what is even the nature of the moral facts at which you espouse? Like, if it's a natural fact, that it's also a moral fact. Like, I don't know what does that even look like from an ontological standpoint? Because like once you strip away that, I don't even know what it means anymore.
Law of nature, law of physics. Like it shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah, but when we talk about like any law of physics, it's not. I don't. Mines are on the back end of where we're at on a progression. I'm not sure how that's some law that has any effect on what agents do from such a minuscule point of existence. How is that?
I don't know what
a
you're
relevant
saying. Like
law?
there are laws that are like gravity is 40 orders of magnitude weaker than the electromagnetic and weak force and strong and weak electromagnetic forces. And there could be laws that are 40 orders of magnitude weaker than that we can barely detect and barely affect us. It's like the strength of the law isn't relevant to whether or not it's a law.
I don't get how there's a law that affects desire or wills that are desire dependent, right? That's what I don't get. I don't get how a law.
You don't understand how a law could affect your brain in a specific way?
I get that. I don't know how it's in some way a governing feature of what it means to be right or wrong. To do something that is right or wrong. Like that doesn't.
If something
especially when you take away normativity, which is what we mean by that.
Again, you're applying the normativity. Like I'm done with you on the normativity thing. I've already addressed this like a million times. There isn't any. So you're saying you don't understand how my model is this thing because it doesn't imply this thing that I don't put in the model. Like, okay, that's irrelevant.
Yeah, but we'll go back to the whole law thing, right? So you're saying there's some law, but this law is concerned with whether or not
just is. It's just like it's no different from the law of physics. Like saying that, we are corresponding to this law. We're following gravity by going towards the planet. Like, okay, we're like letting gravity pull us. And we can go against gravity. We can go against the way gravity is pulling us. That's perfectly fine too. So we can go with the moral law where it's pulling us, or we can go against it and where it's not pulling us.
I don't know how we're going against. I don't know how you even make that assessment of that, like whether you're going against it or not. What are you even using as a
moral
reference?
Intuitions? We've already covered that. Like that's the only evidence we have is moral intuitions. That's the thing that the law affects. That's the only way we're going to know if we're going towards it or against it, if it is a thing.
Sure, but look, I'm a naturalist. Like you're a naturalist. I'm not a moral naturalist, but look at when you're breaking this down, you're talking about particles or fields. I don't know what it is about fields in your brain or the particles that arise some desire at which there's a law. Like that to me, it's so. You have to help me. That's so foreign to me. I don't even know what that means.
I'm not sure what you're saying here. Like, we can electrocute your brain and cause desires. So if there's a law that did it, that would be perfectly reasonable. Like, there's no difference there. Like, laws can cause physical interactions in the brain just like electrodes can.
Yeah, we have desires. I agree that we.
No, no, no,
What I'm
no. So,
saying.
so a law can cause desires. Like electrodes can cause desires. They zap you in the brain. They cause desires. So if there is a law that causes a certain kind of a desire more often than another one, that's perfectly reasonable. Like, there's nothing incoherent about that.
I guess I don't know how you discern whether or not there's some law acting upon the fact that we have desires in the first place. Like, so
Okay.
I'm somebody that's gonna say that there aren't moral facts in the world. There's just people that have desires of
That's
things, right?
Yeah, that's why
Um,
it's a hypothesis. If we could actually demonstrate that, I'd have a Nobel Prize. So yeah, working on it. If I actually claimed I could demonstrate that, then I wouldn't need it to be a hypothesis anymore. It would be proven.
that's fair. I mean, look, I grant that. I don't know. I struggle with the obviously you're done with the normativity thing, so I won't rehash that again. But um, maybe if I do go up in October, we can talk about this in person, and you can like really just shake me and explain it to me. But I'm yeah, the law thing is where I'm really stuck at now. I mean, like I just don't know how some law has some feature at which you could discern why impositions of will versus like completely going against an imposition of will, doing the opposite would have any effect other than just appealing to the way people feel about things, which is already appealing to desires, and then concluding that about wills, which are desires. It seems to me to be like a good subjectivist theory. I don't see how it's objective.
So if it's a common feature of all things caused by something objectively external to all subjective feelings, that would be how. So if this feeling, whatever the feeling is, if it's caused by some feature of reality, like imagine if we're in a computer program, and inside the computer program, every being is programmed with this in them. That means there's this feature that is objective to human psychology that is programmed into human psychology that we're touching upon. Like, we've been programmed to feel this. Like, it's not just subjective. This is a thing that exists independent of our imaginations. Right? Like, that's pretty easy to understand, right?
Sure. I mean, I get that. I get what you're saying. I'm trying to figure out how you have like I get the ontology, I guess. I'm trying to understand how you have the justification part.
What? So it's a
I don't know how you.
hypothesis. Like, we have this feeling. I'm saying it's probably like that. It's probably like one of those, like us being in the Matrix and we're all programmed with this feeling for some reason.
And absent minds, or I guess before the development of minds, how does this law affect other things?
How would a law in the Matrix affect things without minds if there were no minds? The law would still be there. It would still be programmed into the computer. It would still exist, whether it affected anything or not, wouldn't it? Right? Like, if there's a program in the
Yeah,
computer, the program is there whether or not it's running, right?
yeah, I
So
got
it
you.
doesn't make a difference if it's affecting us. It can still be there.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out how you even discern what that thing even is. I don't. We can just say there's this thing there, right? But
If we
I
start
don't
with
know how.
the hypothesis, so if there is a thing affecting us in a certain way, then we're going to move towards this certain way more than opposite ways. Do we see a pattern in the way that we're affected? Yes, we definitely see a pattern in the way that we're affected by
Yeah,
our moral
sure.
intuitions. And so
Well, hold
it's
on. Let's stop. So
possible.
let's stop right there. Let's stop right there because you're saying there's things we see. There's descriptive things,
Sure.
and if we looked at this like just from an argument standpoint, I'm wondering how you assess it to go. Okay, there's these descriptive assessments, and then this is the thing. But someone could just flip that and go, if we have a conclusion of impositions of will, right? Like that sneaks in some value in there. I'm
No, again,
wondering
the
how you
value
would.
is purely in the human brain. So our brain is affected in a certain way. This is a fact. Whatever is doing that, that's morality, that's a fact. And then also in some other part of our brain, we then subjectively apply this oughtness language to that thing that's occurring in our brain. The
Sure.
oughtness doesn't
No
is
one.
not
So
in
you're
any
saying
way
just no one
required for
should
any of
actually
that.
care. No one should actually have care about it unless they just assess the natural fact existing and then going,
Right.
okay, well,
I don't care if anybody cares about it. Like they can care about whatever they want to care about. Whether they care makes no difference to me. Like I don't like if somebody thinks the world is flat, I don't care what they think. The objective fact is true whether or not they care about it. What people care about is irrelevant to objective truth. I don't care if people care.
sure. Yeah, I would grant that. Yeah. So I mean, I'm I guess I'm just stuck on the motivational force of how the law would tell me to care about doing something in virtue
The
of it.
law doesn't need to care about anything. It can just be a coincidence that it affects our brains in this way.
Hmm. So it doesn't matter to you that the natural fact alone doesn't wouldn't give you normativity, right? Like
You don't need
there's no
normativity
need,
for anything. It's irrelevant.
so there's no need for a motivational force in the assessment that I
Nope.
should punch you or I shouldn't punch you.
Yeah, you don't need any motivation whatsoever. Like you could say, I want to be
Yeah.
immoral, and so I should punch you. Like that's perfectly fine. It just wouldn't, by the moral standard, it would be immoral. But you can still have the should there. Like that's fine. If you just have other criteria that motivate you, that's fine. Morality doesn't need to be something that motivates you to be true.
Yeah.
Judgment entirely.
So I guess where I'm at is like I like commend the kind of different take on it. But I guess since it's so juxtaposed to how I view meta ethics that I feel like we're talking about something different, like entirely.
Well, no, so I can prove that false immediately because morality is whatever is causing our feelings. That's morality. Like you don't get an option B. Morality is necessarily the thing causing our feelings. So whatever is causing that, that's morality. There's no alternative there. You don't get to be like, nah, it can't be this or it must be this. Like, no, reality determines what morality is, not your definition of it. So if something else is causing our feelings other than what you think it is, then your idea is wrong and reality is right. So we're talking about the same thing, whatever is causing our moral feelings.
So the subjectivists, the like non-cognitivists or whatever, any position can agree with that. It's just you're making the extra step to say, well, it doesn't matter what somebody really thinks. There's just something that governs the fact that that is the case. It's like an
Sure.
extra.
I'm not sure. Like, so, because your argument was is that we're talking about different things. Like, no, we're not. We're definitely not. We're definitely when the word we use the word morality, we refer to the thing causing the feelings. That is, we are definitely referring to the same thing.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't call morality like desire preference, which is why which is why I'm not a realist
What
or a
like what you define it as is irrelevant here. So when we're saying we're talking about morality, you agree that morality is our moral intuitions, right? Like if those didn't exist, there would be no concept of morality, right?
if you said if desires didn't exist, I'm sorry, you cut out.
If our moral intuitions didn't exist, then the term morality wouldn't exist. There would be no such thing. We never would have come up with it. It is specifically just a reflection of our desires. Whatever is causing those, that's morality. Right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you have to have agency to determine that. Sure.
No, I mean like so things can have agency and no morality, like psychopaths or whatever. Morality specifically refers to the specific desires we have that make us feel like that action is
Yeah.
good or that action is bad. So when we're
Sure.
talking about morality, we both agree that that is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I'm wondering, like, how you have the motivational force for even caring about what is good or what is bad.
Which is not a part of morality at all. Again, so what morality is those feelings. We have these feelings that we should or shouldn't do something, and we want to explain what is causing those feelings. That's it. That's all we care about. The actual feeling itself doesn't matter. We want to know what's causing the feelings.
Sure. Yeah. And so your assessment is just going to be it's just this natural law that is responsible for that phenomena,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
Um, yeah. So I mean, how so in I guess practicality sense, like if you're going to expect like a confirmation on this, I assume you're going to have to agree that like this isn't something you're going to see in your lifetime. This is probably something you have predictions that
Well, no, I think
are
that it's definitely possible we see this in my lifetime. Like, I think it's
okay. So
possible that artificial intelligence is invented and that it comes to a similar conclusion. That was another prediction I made.
Okay, so how does, in virtue of what artificial intelligence, or again, more people thinking that this is the case, add validity to the conclusion? Because like clearly that doesn't.
It does. So, like, if you think there is this law that's affecting all consciousnesses in some way, and we create a consciousness that isn't based on evolution, then that shows that this thing, whatever it's coming to, isn't just based on evolution.
Is there a logical contradiction in the fact that people could be mistaken for something
No.
that isn't that natural thing? Okay, so then
What does that
I don't
matter?
know.
There's no logical contradiction in people being wrong about gravity. That doesn't mean it's not existing.
Yeah, but if your thing is going to entail that as the prediction,
Like, it seems like you're asking
um,
that ask for a prediction that is mutually exclusive to all others and solve under determination, which you literally can't do. Like, I don't need to do that.
yeah, no, I get that point. Well, I think that it's a little bit, it's not as open as that in the sense of that like this isn't some anomaly, right? This happens all the time where if you're going to assess it on the basis of what people think or go ad populum, then we clearly know that that's false. I mean, go on TikTok and
No,
look at
like
spiritual.
predicting how people are going to change in the future based off inputs is perfectly reasonable for testable prediction. Psychology does it all the time.
Um, yeah, I guess where I'm at is if you're going to say that people assume this, I don't see how that
But
couldn't be the case where somebody has a similar prediction, but it's just right. It's not the actual natural law. It's just the coincidence in
under
the fact.
determination, that's perfectly fine. There's no contradiction with that. That's not an objection to my model.
I mean, if you're gonna say it's in, if it's gonna coincide with other predictions to confirm it, yeah, sure. I'm not gonna just base it off the one thing. Obviously, I'm the predictions that you're giving me seem like they're very easily. They're things that would be underdetermined.
All
Uh,
predictions are underdetermined infinitely
yes,
by an infinite
I
amount. There's no difference there. Einstein's theory, Newton's theory, they all have an infinite amount of underdetermination. This isn't relevant. And saying that in mine is extremely well defined. People will see rocks as falling on them as immoral is an extremely counterintuitive prediction. That's something we definitely do not expect under pretty much any other contemporary view of morality. So it's a very strange prediction to make, like space-time bending. It's very, very unique. Could you make up other ones? Yes. Has it ever happened? No. So it's a very good prediction.
um yeah, I don't know. Like from my understanding of where predictions are, I don't know any predictions that are based off of like people will feel this way in the future and that confirms it. Like I get in morality the
Most of
domain is
psychology is based off of that.
um I would say there's more than just the actual intuitions within that. There's
No, like
more that has.
most of it is polls. Like, how do you feel about this topic? How are you
Yeah, so I
affected
don't
by
know
this
much about
fact?
psychology to make a confident comment about it, but um sorry. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I don't care.
So sorry, remind me where we're at. I had a brain fart with that.
I have no idea. You were saying that there's never been predictions based off psychology before or something. No predictions based
No,
off
so
of.
I'm saying like the predictions based off of the fact that people feel some way about things is like
So, like to give
I
one
mean,
example, there's linguistics makes predictions about people having certain words. Like, oh, they don't have a word for north, or they don't have a word for whatever. So therefore, they don't think about the directions in the same way we do. And then they make a poll and say, "Oh, do you think about this thing?" Like, nope, they don't. It's all just about subjective feelings. This is a very common thing in linguistics and psychology and sociology. It's very, very common.
sure. I mean, is there any prediction in your model that's not going to be just based off of like?
No, if there was any prediction based off of anything other than intuitions, then I could win a Nobel Prize.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is like, would this be something that discoverable in like neuroscience or? anything
Physics,
like
I would
that, you
assume.
think?
Once we get far enough in physics, I would assume it's going to be discoverable in physics. I don't know how because I don't have access to that kind of science.
Sure. And again, I appreciate, like, I'm not, yeah, I'm not trying to be like antagonizing on it. I'm not. I just,
Well, these are like the same 6 questions I'm always asked every single time, and they're all answered in the exact same way.
um, I mean, you've had the question about progression because, like, to me, I don't
Progression.
feel like you.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, I mean, appreciate the answer. At least you said there's just some trend. For me, I feel like my first initial assessment was that you'd have to beg the question to even refer to what moral progression means, and
yeah,
then you
yeah. So
conclude.
I've definitely been asked, like, how do we know this is a progression and not a regression? That's like fairly. It's not as common for sure, but it's just like the labeling it a progression isn't really a part of the model. It doesn't matter. It's a pattern, and I just label it progression. It doesn't matter what I label it. The pattern exists regardless of what I label it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot. So I have a lot to think about in terms of the normativity aspect too, which you seem to. That probably is the one you're probably the most fucking sick of, I bet.
Yes, because it's the same question over and over again, which I've asked in the same way and answered in the same way like a million times. Like, you don't need normativity in the morality. It's just, you don't require. It's not. Mine isn't the only one that does this. There are other models that do this. This is not spectacular, not amazing. It's like, I don't know why people have a hard time with this. It's just like, oh, I define morality
Well,
this way, therefore it can't be anything else.
also, Tom, like when we hear it, we think like, you don't need consciousness in the philosophy of mind, or you don't
What?
like need some right, like, and someone can make some like, right. There's things that you can make arguments for. That's great. Like, someone could say we don't need qualia. We could just be like an eliminativist or something, and cool. But I guess I'm just not. My thing is, the answers are not bad. I'm not satisfied with how can discern it at any point other than it just being conjecture. I guess that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a law of physics, so we'll be able to discover like any other law. That's the hypothesis.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I've talked to moral naturalists that just that throw. It's definitely not like you're the first person to go, to hell with normativity. But I'm someone that I don't even, know what it means for there to be a moral fact, and so I'm very skeptical from that standpoint. But then I'm also skeptical when someone says, well, there's a moral fact or a natural law and it doesn't need normativity. It's like, I get why you make the move,
Well, the
or
question
why I
is
would want to make the
why do you
move.
think
But
normativity is required? Because it seems like the only reason you think that is because that's how you define the word, and that's it. That's your only justification is you define the word that way.
um, yeah. So I mean, a lot of people would argue, you could just go. There's intuitions that we require is what we ought to do, or some standard.
Well, yeah,
Which,
you can say that I have a
but
moral
mine,
intuition that morality entails normativity. That's perfectly fine. That's a
sure,
reasonable
sure.
argument.
Yeah,
But
I
you
mean,
wouldn't.
I
But
agree with
to
that,
say
but
that
I
it's a
don't think it
moral
has the full.
intuition doesn't mean that that's exclusively the only thing that's logically possible. Moral intuition
Sure,
doesn't mean
sure, sure.
it's logically impossible for it to be any other way.
Sure. So I have a few reasons. So one, it would, you could side with intuition. I don't like to go there because of the exact kind of reasons you raised, but one would be like, if you tell, like, I used the example already, but if you tell me, like, um tying if I tied your shoelaces together so you trip, right? It's an involuntary imposition on your will. If you say, that's wrong to do, it to me that's only wrong in virtue of a further fact that me tying your shoes together satisfies some standard of what we call wrongness, right? It's not just within itself that and in that imposition on will is wrong. Like, there has to be some standard at which that's applied
Wait,
to.
what does this have to do with normativity? So that standard could just be law X. Like where is the normativity required in
Right,
anything you just
well, yeah,
said?
but if you say it satisfies law X or whatever, I guess I get how you would say that, but from me, that standpoint, I would say, okay, well, why ought I care about the law?
Well,
And
so again,
then
the question is this: wait, you're begging the question.
you've
So I'm
already
asking, why do we need normativity? And you're saying, well, why ought we care about the law? I don't care if you care. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, why is that important? Why do you think we
okay.
need to
So, well,
care?
then the other reason is that if we just look at this propositionally, like, if you give me an assessment of moral progression and intuition over time, for me to conclude, okay, well, impositions of will are immoral, um, it's entirely it has value. It's a normative statement, and that there's some to
No,
me
that's
there's
descriptive.
that states a
Like,
way that you.
so I'm not seeing what you're saying here. So like, if morality is a law of nature and it is a fact that X corresponds or doesn't correspond, then there's no normativity there. That's just morality is X, like this law, and if it doesn't correspond to that law, it's not moral. It has nothing to do with prescriptions there. So I'm not seeing why
Sure,
you
yeah.
think morality requires normativity. Like, I don't understand how your arguments are relevant.
Well, so on the first point, I see how your way to basically say no. I'm not taking descriptive assessments or premises and then concluding with a normative one. I'm concluding with a descriptive one. That there's a natural law or whatever. I get that now. But on the other end, for the normativity aspect, uh, I feel like I would satisfy that in the way that I've already categorized it. One, you could go with intuitions, which I again don't like to hang my hat on, but it just has to do with the motivational force of
Okay,
what we do in
why does the
what we
motivational
do in
force have anything to
situations.
do with morality?
Otherwise, I don't know what, like, if I don't have a reason to act in a certain way, given a certain dilemma, and we just say it's not required, then you're still left with the what should I do in this situation? Like, should I pull the kid out of the way? Should I not do it? There's still a reality to the fact that there's a normative, there's some standard at which you should apply, whether you think it's objective or not. There's something you should do, and then there's people that act upon that, right? That's what
Wait,
people.
so not following here. Like, why does this matter to morality? Like, you're saying that morality has to
The
answer this
feature
question of
of
something.
reality that you're kind of ignoring in your theory,
Well, no, no. So,
right?
you're saying the purpose of morality is to give us an answer to the question, "What should we do?" or something like that, right?
But no, I'm saying when you have I guess I would rephrase. I would say when you have like a moral, if there's a dilemma that you would deem a moral dilemma, right? It's gonna relate to how one ought to, what they should do given X, right? I mean, there's some feature in the real world at which I need to apply the principle, have some motivational force for me to behave X instead of Y, because that's how we interact as agents. And then we have guilt about doing Y instead of X, right?
Okay, so
And
yeah, we can use any set of criteria to do that. Like, we can say, "I want more money, therefore I should get a job," or whatever. That's a motivational force. But that doesn't mean that the motivational force is in the job.
um well, yeah, I mean, so I would agree. I would say for me, the motivational forces are in just desires, but I'm trying to argue within the framework of
Well, yeah,
developing
that's what
like
I'm
a
asking. Like,
real,
why do you need the motivational force to be in the morality? Why is that important?
uh, because that's what's going to actually have a real life application
Which
to
has
what we
what
talk.
to do with morality? Like, you're saying that, I define morality as something that will influence people's actions. Like, that's not relevant to morality. But again,
So I'm gonna grant like in when we talk in like uh, the whole domain and analytic philosophy is an issue of defining things. So granted, I'm gonna say I don't just take something and say that it can't be melded or changed, especially in the way that you might take it. But the reason why I take it is that it has some actual real life application to a situation. And for you to strip that in the model to me seems to take away the actual real life application of what we talk about in meta ethics, which is what I should have done at t=5 when
okay,
I
but
had
why
the.
does this matter to morality? Like, saying it doesn't have real world applications. Like, I don't care. Like, well, why do you think this is important to discovering if morality is real or not?
Because I don't know how someone reflects if that's not the case to say when I had position A or B at
I'm
t
looking for,
equals.
like, morality is impossible in this case because X. Like, morality entails X that doesn't have X, something like that. And why is X entailed in morality?
Yeah, I don't feel like you could just principle of charity. What I'm saying is just the fact of that this has a real life application to what someone ought to do in some moral dilemma is what we talk about, right? That's what we mean by a
Well,
moral
that's what I
fact.
said earlier. So you define morality as X, like, okay, that's great. Why do you define it this way? And you said, well, intuition, that one I understood, and then some other reason which you just circled back to because you define it that way. So it seems like the only reasons you have are you define it that way because of intuition.
No, because it's not just about intuition. It's about the actual application of what we talk about in a metaethical thesis. Like
Yeah,
if
but
I
why
should,
is the application important to what morality is? The answer is probably going to be because you intuitively feel it's important.
um, well, so I'm not a realist, but if I'm going to argue in that sense, I think that is a non-negotiable fact for the fact that it has to be applicable in the
Because
domain at which we operate. Otherwise, then you're just saying this thing's immoral or it's not, and it has no effect, and it doesn't matter. I don't really care.
yeah,
Okay, well,
because
then I don't know what application
why
this
is
thing
that a
even has.
non-negotiable fact? What makes that a non-negotiable fact? Why?
I just gave the reason why.
What was it?
The fact that if you if you strip that away, there is no way at which the actual scenario that I give even matters anymore.
Okay, why does that matter to morality?
Because that's the only way at which we're gonna, from my opinion, you're gonna be able to derive some way to show how a person behaves or acts. It just necessarily entails
Okay, why
normativity.
does how people act have anything to do with morality?
That well, I mean, that's like saying, why does philosophy of mind have anything to do with consciousness?
No. So it's like you saying that it must impact how people act. Why do you think that it matters to morality? I mean, I'm doing this rhetorically. The answer is no matter what you're going to say, it's always going to come back to you intuitively think this. That's it. That is the ultimate
Yeah, I mean, but
justification.
that's the case for anything. I mean,
Well, no, no, no. Like,
I'm a
it's
skeptic. I'm gonna
no,
go
no, no,
to
no. So,
say
so
that in
like,
any.
the only evidence we have of morality, one way or the other, the reason people came up with the definition was their intuitions. That's it. That's the only evidence you have. So the reason you think this is required is because of your intuition. That's it. You got nothing else. You think it's important because your intuition thinks this matters to morality. Now I can
Sure,
prove it doesn't.
you're gonna break. I mean, you can break down anything down to. I mean, you might disagree, but you could break down
Well, no, like
classical
the
logic down
world's
to what
exists
your
isn't the
intuitions.
world exists not because of your intuition. Things exist not because of your intuition. The question specifically for morality, the only evidence we have is intuition. So if you're making a claim about morality, morality entails X. You're doing it from intuition.
Yeah,
That's it.
and I mean, to say that morality does not entail X, right? I mean, we're just on a par from saying what
Yep.
it entails. I get that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
That's not.
so you claiming that it necessitates normativity is just your intuition and is not in any way more or less supported than mine on face value. Now, I can say,
Sure, sure. On face value, I have no problem with that. But I'm taking another step, and I'm saying when it actually applies to like a real life application of what you do at some situation, is this moral or not? When the application of morality matters, when you don't have that, then it's like I don't even know what the fuck we're talking about anymore.
again, like no one cares when we're talking about an objective thing, how you should act. Your subjective choices don't matter. It's irrelevant. If no humans existed, it would still exist. How it impacts how people act is not relevant to objective morality. It's not relevant to objective anything.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're just going to be arguing. I say X and you say not X. I
Well,
mean,
you're just saying, oh, morality must necessarily be subjective because it must subjectively influence your subjective actions. Like, no, it doesn't. That's obviously wrong. Like this, and this is not like I don't need to defend this. This has already been defended in philosophy. It's called judgment internalism versus judgment externalism. We know for a fact it's very common that moralities do not need to be influence you. It doesn't. It's just not a requirement. It's not a thing.
yeah, I don't. I would push back to say that it's a fact that's established
It's this
fact.
judgment internalism, judgment externalism. You can research it yourself. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has nothing to do with
Yeah.
me. You can check that on your
No,
own.
I
There are
agree.
named positions for these things.
No, I agree. There's names, positions, but to cite like there's distinction between justification, externalism, and internalism. It's already been solved. The internalism wins is not an argument.
Oh
It's
no no
just
no no no.
stating.
So your position is that this is necessitated in morality. I'm saying obviously it's not if a large portion of the philosophical community says it's not. So like if you're saying every philosopher agrees on this, like it's necessitated that this is the case, then yeah, that would be a valid argument. But if there's a large portion of philosophers that's like, no, it's really not. It's really commonly understood that this is not important. Then your argument that it's necessitated in morality just doesn't follow. It's just obviously false because there's a huge portion of philosophers that reject that for a well-established reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna grant there's people that reject it. But from the domain of at least which I've taught, and I don't go in right? I don't have any education formally, but I have not I've not experienced anyone to say to strip away normativity. In fact, that seems to be kind of the pushback on
Well,
moral
that's a different
naturalism.
topic.
Is
So
that
right
that's
now,
kind of the move
wait,
that
wait,
you
wait,
have to
wait.
make.
So your topic, the topic right now we're talking about is does morality need to influence you? That's different from normativity. Those are two separate things. So the fact that normativity does not need to influence you or to motivate you, that's what judgment internalism is about. So morality has nothing to do with motivation. That part is well known. So normativity and motivation are two separate things.
Sure, I guess when I'm talking about motivation, I'm just saying like what would give somebody in their desire to to act in accordance given some standard. Like I'm not trying to put a bunch of weight on motivation as much as I am what the person should do in dilemma X and whether they should choose A or B or whatever the situation is.
That would
Right?
just
Like
be
that application to me seems to matter, whereas in your model it seems like we don't have to worry about that.
yeah, it literally doesn't matter. Like if you think you should do the
Yeah,
immoral thing
then
because you like immorality, that's fine. That doesn't change morality. Like based if we accepted your definition that it must entail what people should do or whatever, well then people could just want to do immoral things, then that becomes the moral thing. So it's purely subjective by your definition. You're just defining subjectivity into morality by saying it must be what we choose to do or it affects us. Like
well,
clearly if
no,
you
I mean, I
make
would say
morality
it would be an objective standard. I mean, independent of what like the desire
no, no,
of the
no. So I mean,
person.
like, if you're saying that morality has to influence the way we act, and obviously not everyone is influenced in the way they act the same way, or if like there was this law and it did influence the way we act, and so we would present it to everybody, and they decided to not act in the same way, well, then that would disprove the law based on your definition. So if we accept your definition that morality must be influencing the way we act or motivational in some way, and we present it to 10 people and they all do different things, well then morality is debunked because it was contingent on whether or not it motivates people. Like who cares? Like who cares if it motivates people? Why do you think this is important? Like can it motivate people? Can people use it as a
So I
motivation?
mean, well, I think it does matter, but it's also a reason why I don't think that exists in the world to say some natural fact motivates you to have
Yeah, I mean
normal
that's right.
standards.
I wouldn't say a natural
That's
fact
why I'm not a
motivates
moral
people.
realist, right? But
Like,
um,
but who cares? Who cares if it motivates people? Like, we're not saying there is an objective morality which will therefore everyone will listen to it and they will be compelled by it. Like, who cares if they're compelled by it? It doesn't make a difference. Like, why do you think it's important whether or not people actually listen to the law? Like, they can be wrong. People believe lots of stupid things. Whether or not human psychology forces them to listen to it is irrelevant.
yeah, but I mean, that example is a little slippery because I mean you're using some assessment of what people think we should do. Right, and I would agree. Like, I don't care about what someone thinks we should do. I'm going to care about
Well,
what
like
it
what they
is
do.
in the
So, like
world
you're
that
saying that morality.
prescribes what we should do.
Well, yeah, you're saying that morality must in some way entail this shouldness thing. So what does that mean? It compels us? No, like clearly it doesn't need
Yeah.
to compel anybody,
Well,
right?
no,
That does
it's
not.
just necessarily in reference to how we act or behave.
What does that even mean? That's complete gibberish.
It's not gibberish. I mean, it's literally the domain of moral philosophy for
No,
the
again,
last
circular reasoning. You're just begging the
year.
question here. So saying like morality is the principles we can use to differentiate right from wrong. Yes. Does that mean that the principles must be instantiated with shoulds inside the principles? No. Like it's irrelevant. Like the fact that we can use a principle, like many views of morality are based on what's better for society, utilitarianism. Does that mean that society itself is in utilitarianism? Like, no, it doesn't matter. You're conflating the fact that we can use ought statements to describe this thing with the oughts being in the thing itself,
It's
which I've
about
said
how
like
you.
six times.
Well, yeah, but it's about how you actually get to the odds, which is the thing that you derive. You
I like
derive.
X. I ought to do X. It's that simple. That's how you get the oughts.
Sure, but that's just hypothetical. We're talking about categorical
No, I'm
imperatives of
saying
what.
it's only hypothetical. There is no other thing. You don't need the categorical imperatives for morality. It's not important.
Um,
Like if you want to be immoral and you choose to be immoral, that's fine. You can do that. You're just immoral.
sure, but that's not going to deny the fact that there is a categorical imperative of the way that would be right, that would associate with the standard of rightness, which would be, in your case, freedom of
there's
will or whatever.
no,
whatever
there's no categorical imperative there. There's just a fact of the matter that if you do X, you meet this standard. So like if you're tall, you meet the standard of tallness. Does that mean you should do it? No, I don't need there to be a should there. I don't care. I don't care if you should be tall or short. I just know if you are tall or short. Do you need any oughts in that statement? No. Same with morality.
because you're just talking about something about some descriptive assessment,
Yep,
right?
and the morality is the exact same, and you need nothing else for it.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to argue. So and that,
You were claiming that you need something else, and I'm saying, okay, prove it.
Well, I'm just you're coming from a descriptive standpoint. I'm coming from it's necessarily a prescriptive standpoint.
Yes, you're saying it needs something else, and the same I've asked you for like the past hour is prove it. Like, why do you think you need something else? Like, I've articulated the reasons I think you don't.
Yeah, but so I mean, again, right? Like when we talk about this, I'm not saying this is a proven thing the same way you're saying.
Right? Yeah.
My theory is a proven hypothesis, right?
Okay. So let me rephrase that. The only
I'm just saying that
presented,
this is what the domain of meta ethics is usually referenced.
The only thing you've said is you defined it this way. That's it. That's all you've had. That's the only.
I'm not saying I've defined it this way. I'm talking about this is just the academia and the literature.
No. So it's not the academia. I've shown that. You prefer this definition. You use this definition that whoever, I don't care who made it. Like K, I don't care if you prefer this definition. That's not an argument. Like, again, morality is whatever is causing our feelings. That's it.
Yeah, that's like saying
hard. This is really not hard. You wanting there to be normativity is not relevant to anything.
Yeah, there's nothing that stops me from just saying you not wanting.
Right. Yeah, and I presented very good reasons and arguments of why you don't need that.
I mean, you've just said if it's the case that there's some natural law, right? Then there's just a way that's
like is something moral because you ought to do it, or ought you do it because it's moral? Answering the question, you don't need moral. You don't need normativity if you answer the second horn. That's a good reason. If you think that's intuitively correct, that's a good reason to reject normativity. You don't need normativity because subjective choices don't matter to morality, objective morality. That's a good reason to reject normativity. So there's lots of good reasons to reject normativity.
Yeah, I mean, if you took that horn and you believe that to be true, I grant that, like that. That's the conclusion you're gonna take. But what I'm saying is that if you are establishing a moral fact in the world, right, then it's going to prescribe the way that you behave.
That's begging the question. You're just defining it again. So you would I've given good reasons to reject normativity. You would need to get good reasons to accept normativity. Like you said, well, if there's normativity, it'll motivate us. Like, great, I don't care.
No, I mean it's not about I think you're strawmanning the position. What I'm saying is that the main thing I've hinged upon is that it has to do with the application of what you do in some situation X, right? Like
I'm not sure what that means. So I'm asking, give me a reason.
It's really not hard.
Why we want normativity in morality? Why would we want normativity? Why is it a good thing to have normativity in a model of morality? Just saying it does. I don't care.
No. Reason. That the exact reason I've given like 7 times, which is that if I have some situation at which I need to apply a standard of how I should act given whatever the dilemma is, then that is what's going to inform me on that, right? That's what's going to necessarily provide some standard. To just say something is wrong in virtue of it being a fact just doesn't satisfy how I can actually apply that given some situation. So what I'm saying is in my model, I can or not my model, but in a model at which has that.
So you've said this like I've responded to the same thing like 6 times. Like
yeah,
I don't care
I know, that's
how
why
you apply it. It doesn't matter to morality. The only argument you've given is, well, if it has normativity, it'll tell you how to apply it. I don't care. Like, it's not about application. I don't care. This is not a positive that you gain by having normativity. This is not an argument for normativity.
Yeah, but so for me, it's like your question is like asking why does philosophy of mind have to deal with?
Yeah, it's because you defined it that way. But you haven't
rather than the square root of David Schwimmer.
Again, you haven't given a reason why we should accept normativity in morality. You're just saying, it's defined that way. Like, I don't care. Like, your definition is wrong. Like, your definition, the only correct definition of morality is whatever causes our feelings. That's the correct definition.
Yeah, at that point, I don't know. It seems like you're just whatever causes desire preference.
Yeah, whatever is causing our feelings of morality is morality. If it's just evolution, if it's just subjective, whatever it is, if whatever is causing our feelings, that's what morality is. You don't get to
insert thing that's dependent upon the will. Sure, but each person that has a will that's desire dependent necessarily has a different will that they're
Yeah, but if they're all caused by some
corresponding. So
underlying
I don't.
thing, like a law or a program in Matrix, then that's what morality is. If it's just subjective in evolution, then it's just subjective in evolution. So your definition of wanting normativity is completely irrelevant. Like, there needs to be no normativity to explain our feelings. It could just be evolution. There's no normativity in evolution.
But hold on. So if trying to go back to what you just said here, if so, hold on. So sorry. Say that again because I'm losing my train of thought.
So morality is whatever is causing our feelings of moral stuff. That's it.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So
wait. So if evolution is causing our feelings, then morality is just a product of evolution, and there is nothing there. There's no normativity. So morality does not require normativity.
sure. Okay. So for the first point, when you're saying it causes our desires, right? But then you have some model at which you apply as objective. I don't know how in some situation where someone's will, right, is desire dependent, that's different from some other thing at which you could claim as objective and not just some.
Your will can be caused by things in your brain. Very simple.
Yeah, but if they're different wills that correspond to the same pattern at which you're talking about.
Yes, then we're talking about the thing that causes the pattern, not just the wills. If there is a program in the Matrix that causes you to feel something, then guess what? The program is the cause of morality, not your feelings.
And so it just doesn't matter what the independent subjects feel, even if they're contradictory wills.
Yes, like if morality causes X in the, like if it's a law of nature or a program in the Matrix, and that's what the objective morality is, the fact that some people are subjectively affectedly different by it doesn't matter at all. Like, does that change the objective program? No. Has nothing to do with the program. It's like, oh, they're just affected differently. Like, so what? Like, it's like light.
Sure,
people see things differently. Does that mean that the object is different because people see it differently? Like, no.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we completely operate on different frameworks then. From at least from that's I really don't know how to make progress from that standpoint. Because I mean, you're just going to say that why do I need normativity, and I feel like I've satisfied that to
You haven't at all.
the same standards at which you would apply just intuitions for your standard, and then beyond it actually having some applicability when we talk about a situation at what I should do and shouldn't do, because that's what happens in the actual real world. Then for me, I don't know. I don't even know how to. I don't really know how to see how it has any application in the real world or why it matters other than just saying it's some thing that gives us our preferences of desires.
Again, I've already covered this. Like, we start with our feelings. That's it. There's no other starting point. You would have to then say our feelings are necessitated by actual normativity because X. There isn't one. There's no reason at all that our feelings would require normativity. Not a one. It could just be evolution, so no normativity. Easy to prove we don't need normativity to explain morality. Could it be something else, like a law of nature? Yes. Could it be a program in the Matrix? Yes. Do either of those have normativity? No. Do they explain morality?
Well, so
yes.
So if you're saying evolution, I'm wondering how, under that framework, it's objective. Like, how do you parse that up?
It's not. So that's one of these subjective options. So that's kind of the point here. Wait. So if morality is just our feelings, and our feelings are explained by evolution, so morality is a product of evolution, and it's completely subjective. There's no normativity in that. We have now completely explained morality. It is fully explained under subjective evolution. So we don't need normativity to explain evolution or morality. Same thing, we could just say, okay, there's a law. It's objective. It's a feature of the world, like a program in the Matrix or whatever. That would also explain these feelings. It would be objective morality. Objective morality is these programs that exist in the world objectively independent of humans, also has no normativity. Either one of those, subjective or objective, can both explain morality, zero normativity.
And so in a situation where, like, I know the one that you get a lot of, try to just a different one with the pushing the kid, but let's just say like some action, like punching you or something, right? If I punch you and you don't want to be punched, should that pattern to you shouldn't tell me in any, like, I shouldn't feel a way.
Your actions are completely dependent on your subjective preference and nothing else. I don't care about your actions. I don't care if any humans never existed. That would be fine. This would still be objective. So if you make it contingent on how humans should act, it's inherently subjective and completely irrelevant to objective morality.
And so if like it's an involuntary imposition for you, from my perspective, for you to not want to be punched,
What?
and then I do it, right? Like you don't want to be punched, right? And then I just do it,
Yeah.
and it's or I guess let me say it this way: I don't want you to not be punched, right? It's my will,
Imposition
my
of will only
freedom.
applies to yourself and your property. You can't will for somebody else to will something.
Okay, so how do you parse that out?
It's the conclusion of my model. It's like the whole point is that you're not allowed to impose on other people. Like you just playing with the definition and interpreting the definition of the word differently is like it's just a straw man. It's not my model.
No, I'm not trying. I'm not trying to strawman. I'm just
Right.
genuinely
I'm not
trying
it's
to.
not like I'm
Yeah.
not arguing you're being dishonest or anything.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't watch all the. I've seen a few of your. I know we've had a discussion before. I didn't really prod you at all at that time, but
But yeah,
So
so
yeah,
involuntary
I'm not
imposition
as familiar with the objections as probably maybe your audience or obviously you are, but
so involuntary imposition of will applies to yourself and your property, and it does not apply to other people or their property. No. So like you interpreting the words that way and interpreting me willing you to will something as an involuntary imposition is just incorrect. Just that's not the correct definitions on how it applies to my model. You can choose to interpret it that way and just be a straw man. So that's not how it works on my model.
okay. Um, I'm trying to think if I have any other um kind of any other issues. I guess I would just like do you. I think you already answered it, but you would just if you were to like actually give an argument, with premises, you would just essentially you're just essentially going to say the natural law is the conclusion descriptively, right? That's just going to be there's
Morality is the natural law. The natural law exists. Um, Therefore, to follow the natural law is moral. Something like that.
sure. Yeah, so I mean, in a lot of like moral naturalists I talk to, they have a similar tactic to at least. I mean, I don't want to say a tactic, 'cause I don't want to sound like it's dishonest, but to kind of strip away normativity or things like that. But um, yeah, and I get your point. So it's like hard for me to push back on the sense of that it's going to just be the case regardless of how you feel. Um, but then at that point, I'm just like, well, then I don't even know how morality has a play. I mean, I'm already someone who doesn't believe in morality in the first place, so it's not something for me to really ponder in that sense. But
Well, did you not understand the law? Like in the Matrix, if there's a programmer who programmed us with a particular law, and that law is in the
yeah,
universe
no, I get that.
itself, then it's objective, right? It's not subjective. It's
Yeah,
an objective thing.
no,
And
that's what I'm saying that I see. I don't have a problem with that. The I guess the problem I have is more just trying to figure out the fact that I don't now it almost seems to strip away just the application of when you have some dilemma because it seems like what you're saying is yeah, I mean it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
well,
if
you can
I
still
should
say
have pushed
like
the kid out of the way or
if
if
you
I
have a
shouldn't.
dilemma, you can say, well, does it correspond to this law? Yes or no. If yes, moral. If no, immoral.
But then at that point, aren't you just saying then you should do this? And then
Nope,
now
that's
we've
purely
entered.
hypothetical imperative. You are saying we can objectively show it does or does not correspond to the law. And then you are subjectively saying, well, okay, I like the law, so I want to do the stuff that corresponds to the law. There's no categorical imperative there. It's purely hypothetical. We are affected by this law in a certain way, and we then like or dislike this, and so we choose to adhere to it or not to adhere to it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I see that. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an interesting aspect. I mean, I assume a lot of your pushback is going to be people saying, well, obviously with the normativity, but the fact that you just say all you need is hypothetical imperatives. I'm sure that turns heads mainly for you, or no?
What? No.
No, I mean, because to me that's a foreign thing. Just say, well, I can reference, something that does it correspond to the natural fact, right, of impositions of will, and then you're saying like, well, you don't. There's no imperative that you ought to do it. It's like, okay, well then, so I don't know what the point of morality is at that point. Like why you would even need it? Why how you would ascribe using it in any way, why you should use it. You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't
So
care if
someone's
people should do it. I think
meaningless.
what matters to me is it an objective fact in the world? And I think yes. So it's like it's a law of nature or a program made by a programmer kind of a thing. So it exists. The thing causing our feelings, it exists objectively, without our opinions, not based on our opinions.
So
That's
it
all I
wouldn't
care about.
matter. It wouldn't have mattered if it was the opposite of an imposition of will. If that's just the fact, that's just the fact of it.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Like
yeah,
if it exists, I could be wrong and it could be something else, but it would still be objective. It would just be something else.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting take. I like the way you use the Euthyphro. I mean, but I still think, like, right, I'm gonna take that side where it's like, no, if someone's saying there's some moral fact, like that's gonna prescribe the way I ought to do it, and I know we hashed that out
Yeah,
a bunch of
you
times,
can
but
have the intuition that that's the correct way to do it. I disagree, and if people see it my way, that's fine. If they see it your way, that's fine.
yeah, no, I mean, I'll have to kind of think about it on your perspective. I'm obviously not convinced that's the case, but I definitely think it's an interesting way to formulate it.
Cool.
Yeah. So, do you have any questions for me or anything on I don't know, morality or anything like that?
No, not really.
No, you're so like I remember when I asked you like 2 months ago if you wanted to have a conversation. Like Pasta Mike was like, Jmike wants to have a conversation with you about moral realism, and you just give like the same like, okay.
Yeah.
That just cracks me up.
Yeah, I don't actually enjoy conversations. I do it for work, so.
Sure, yeah, I get it. So when we hung out, when I got to actually meet you, you didn't enjoy it. You just did it because you had to do a debate.
More or less. So like I hate human interaction. Like I feel like shit the entire time I'm around talking to other people. Like it doesn't make me feel good at all. So I've
Sure.
been most of my life I've spent just playing video games, watching anime completely alone. And I started a YouTube channel to try and like practice my way out of that because I hate talking to people. So yeah, I've always hated spending time with anybody ever for any reason. Family, friends, I do not like it at all.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if that's the way, I mean, like I'm somebody else is gonna say if that's the way you feel. I mean, that's the way you feel. There's not really anything changing that. But
Yeah, it's
yeah,
not like
you kind of
it's not like it's your fault or that I resent other people or anything. It's just
sure.
emotionally, I don't feel anything from it. Not positive.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no. Yeah, no. I mean, I typically like look. Cease, right? My
Yep.
co-host on Axioms. Me and him, I mean, we'll have. I wouldn't say he's not really the screaming type, but we'll argue and stuff about morality and things. And when you get in these conversations, typically never I don't look at them that way. But I've talked to a lot of people that are just like generally like, look, man, I'm not trying to be a dick to you. I just really fucking don't like these conversations. So I get it. Well, yeah, man. I mean, I don't really have any more questions. I feel like we'll just kind of tread the same water over and over again. Maybe if I think about some more stuff, I'll come back on and challenge those. But um,
Sure.
I'm not really sure where I'd progress from here because it seems we're on a different spectrum of meta ethics.
Sure. All right. Good talking to you. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, well, I'll let you know if I end up going up there. I don't know. I haven't been formally invited, so I would wait for that first, and then if that's the case, then I'll consider it financially.
Oh, all right. Gotcha.
All right, brother.
Yep. See ya.
See ya.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, how's it going?
Did you want Q&A?
Yeah, I was probably just going to do that after this. Maybe do dinner first. Take a break for an hour or two, and then come back.
Okay. Frank, do you want to just keep the stage going until Tom gets back?
No, it's closer because you know what? Unless can you change the name of it? Can you do that? Because I can't do it on my side.
Yeah, I can.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you can do it, go ahead. I'm gonna go get some dinner. I'll be back on in a